can see this. So just on a lighter note, if you see the documentary that has won the Oscars, The Elephant Whisperers, it has such an important message to talk about, right? It talks about how the indigenous people and animals who can never be in conflict, and that they can actually aid the sustenance and the conservation of one another. So there you go.
That widens the perspective, sir. Namaste and welcome to the 54th episode of UPSC Prep Decoded, a podcast brought to you by Abhyankar's IAS so that you can study on the go. I, Khushi Gola, am your host for today, and we're in conversation with Mr. Aashay Abhyankar. A very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Khushi.
So our topic today revolves around how to build a holistic approach towards current affairs. So, sir, to begin with, in class, you often tell us certain do's and don'ts when it comes to reading a newspaper. So, for our listeners, could you repeat the same?
That's a very good question, Khushi. Actually, when you look at a newspaper on a daily basis, you're more going into the addition mode. So, I believe that going into subtraction is going to help a lot. So, what are the areas that you really should be avoiding? One is specific political news, events related to crime and other things which are a generic part of news, both in the national as well as the regional news. Any kind of sporting news, news related to private sector issues that are unlinked to growth or developmental factors, and obviously the large number of advertorials and advertisements that you see in a newspaper. So once you kind of exclude all of these, you will be left with not more than 30 to 35% of the content in a newspaper. Once you have that newspaper content, what I always tell the students as well as listeners is that kind of start noting down these topics and keep a kind of a logbook for a week. Because many a times when you read a newspaper on a Monday or Tuesday, you would see that there is an overlap of that current affair news item on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and even in editorials over the weekend. So once you're able to identify topics, then that is when you start looking at content around it. Now, what kind of content should you be looking at, right? That is what a lot of people are misguided about. So you would see a large chunk of students actually paraphrasing the content from a newspaper itself. Now, that is something that will never work because the newspaper is only reporting certain facts related to that news item. But to ensure that you have a slightly interdisciplinary approach, for example, if we have to pick up a news item related to the Ukraine conflict, you would have to track the phases of that conflict. You would have to look at a map and understand where Ukraine is, where Russia is, what is the point of conflagration between the two, where else are the NATO members positioned, what is India's foreign policy perspective with regard to Ukraine and Russia. So you would realize that the history, the geography, the ecology, the environment, the international relations, the world history components are all coming into this aspect of one current affairs news item. So if you kind of look at it like that and you do a bit of research of about 100 to 150 words on it, you will realize that on a monthly basis, your own current affairs digest self-prepared by you would not hit more than 45 to 50 items in terms of news items. At the most. So when you are having this kind of a news bulletin prepared by you, in most probably handwritten or kind of put together electronically, you would realize that navigation becomes very easy because the entire overlap of general studies and current affairs comes in very beautifully in these news item editorials or in news item topics. And most importantly, this is beneficial both for the prelims as well as the mains.
So you spoke about the interdisciplinary approach. So keeping that in mind, what I've done is I've removed 3 topics from 3 different subjects. So if you could kindly help us decode those topics.
Absolutely, let's get it.
So the first being from polity, the Uniform Civil Code. So how does one go about this subject?
Very good question. So now let's look at the Uniform Civil Code. First, let's look at it from the lens of polity. So you know that it is a part of the directive principles of state policy. It is also having an overlapping issue with the preamble because it reiterates the issue of a democratic secular republic. Then you look at the UCC from the lens of regulation of society. So you see the Supreme Court judgment with regard to a push for a ban against the triple talaq. The issue with regard to a uniform civil code which is coming up today with a judgment that is pending before the Honorable Supreme Court in April, identifying the right of same-sex couples to marry. You also have the Uniform Civil Code with regard to bringing about some sort of uniformity in the regulations of the institutions of society, be they marriage, family, kinship, adoption, inheritance. So here you go, you have one topic that is just listed in polity and you have an entire rainbow of information around it.
So from environment, can we have a look at the cheetah reintroduction plan?
Yeah, now you see a lot of people, there were a lot of naysayers and critics when the entire cheetah relocation plan was happening, saying that, this is more for the optics and things like that, but that is not really true. Because if you look at the entire issue of reintroduction of the cheetah, it's very important to see where this is happening. So let's start with the geography. You have the Kuno National Park, which is in Madhya Pradesh, and then you see all the other national parks where the introduction is going to be, happening in stages, is spread over Uttar Pradesh and Rajasthan. So you are looking at the dry deciduous as well as the dry grasslands of this country. Now, when you look at the cheetah and its reintroduction, you will realize that the man-animal conflict between the cheetah is the lowest among the big cats. Also, you are able to have an entire ecological regeneration around this. Then there is the tourism perspective in having larger footfalls of people to come to these national parks and actually look at that. And most importantly, if you are able to do it with one animal like the cheetah for relocating them and for reintroducing them since it's extinct in India, you can probably extend this to a whole lot of more animal and plant species. So when you look at a topic of the cheetah reintroduction, don't look at it only from a narrow lens. Look at it from a much more larger lens. And then you are able to compare about who is doing it. Like for example, another thing to mention here is that this entire cheetah relocation program is completely happening under the watchful eyes of the Tiger Conservation Authority, right? The National Tiger Conservation Authority. They are the ones who are spearheading it because they've done a fabulous job with the Project Tiger, right? So India is making strides. They are trying to look at the entire issue between animal, wildlife and man conservation. You see whether it's man in the environment, man with the environment, man and the environment. So you can see this. So just on a lighter note, if you see the documentary that has won the Oscars, The Elephant Whisperers, it has such an important message to talk about, right? It talks about how the indigenous people and animals who can never be in conflict and that they can actually aid the sustenance and the conservation of one another. So there you go.
That widens the perspective,
Right.
sir. So lastly, from economy, the most important topic that came in my mind was the annual financial statement, so our budget. So how does one go about decoding that from the syllabus point of view?
Now you see, whenever the budget introduction happens every year, the government of India releases something called an economic survey. This is a very vital document to actually be going through purely because it's laying out a framework or a roadmap of what the economy looks like, the specific sectors that the government is looking at, what kind of a structural and functional perspective does the government take, and then when you are able to understand the economic survey, you are able to start decoding components of the budget within it. A lot of people start memorizing facts and figures. That's really not required, right? Like for example, if you take the recent budget, one very important point of focus post the pandemic has been a huge allocation of financial resources as per the GDP for medical research and innovation. And this is being spearheaded purely because India was one of those handful of countries who were able to manufacture, operationalize and inoculate the population with a homegrown vaccine. And that is no mean feat for a country that has close to 140 crore people. So in this sense, whenever you are looking at the budget, read the economic survey, try to find out sectors that the government is actually pushing for towards growth. What is that roadmap looking like? Because it will have some kind of leanings on what has happened the previous year and what to expect in the next year. And then start looking at how the budgetary allocation actually works. So I believe that kind of a perspective will give a more in-depth analysis, more so important for the answers that we are looking at writing for the mains, right? Apart from just the prelim questions.
Right, sir. Thank you so much for your time, sir. This brings us to the end of the podcast. Lots to take back from this episode. If you like this video, do like, share and subscribe. Your feedbacks and suggestions are always welcome. You can comment them down below or contact us through info@abhyankarIAS.com. Show us some love on our Instagram, Twitter and Facebook handles that go by the name Abhyankar's IAS. Keep listening and stay tuned for more.